In every city, there are streets the streetlights forget. Places where the fog doesn't lift, it settles. Into the bones. Into the records. Into cases no one wants reopened. They told her it would be simple. Walk in. Walk out. Don't look back. But nothing in this world stays buried. And everyone looks back, eventually. Some crimes don't end when the sirens fade. They send out waves. Through testimony. Through memory. Through the people who survive them. They reverberate.
Help me.
This is one of those cases. This is reverberating noir.
Genoa, February 1682. The city is settling into evening. The merchants have closed their ledgers. The narrow streets, the corrughi are growing dark, the kind of dark that swallows sound and memory whole. Near the Piazza Banchi, a man is walking. He is 38 years old. He is one of the most gifted composers alive on the planet at this moment in history. He does not know that this is the last walk he will ever take. A figure steps from the shadows. One movement, one blade, one wound, precise, deep, fatal. The figure vanishes into the labyrinth of the corrughi. And Alessandro Stradella, virtuoso, fugitive, genius, and fool, bleeds out onto the cold Genoese cobblestones. No one is ever charged. No one is ever tried. No one is ever punished. This is the story of why.
Welcome to the show. I'm Nina Jovovich.
And I'm Adam Joe. And today we are going back 344 years to one of the most fascinating, most disturbing, and most undertold murders in the entire history of classical music.
And I want to say right from the start, this story has everything. It has power, it has obsession, it has institutional corruption. It has a victim who was also, in very real ways, an architect of his own destruction. And it has a killer who walked free because the city around him simply decided to look the other way.
Which is, honestly, its own kind of crime. So, let's set the scene. Who was Alessandro Stradella?
Right. So, Stradella was born in 1639. By the time he reaches his mid-30s, he is genuinely celebrated. Operas, oratorios, cantatas, sacred music, the full spectrum of Baroque composition. His oratorio, San Giovanni Battista, written in 1675, is considered by musicologists to be a masterpiece. Harmonically sophisticated, dramatically intense, ahead of its time.
And his innovations in what's called the concerto grosso form, contrasting a small group of soloists against a larger orchestra, those ideas echo forward through decades. They influence Corelli. They influence Handel. The man's fingerprints are on the architecture of Baroque music itself.
And yet, he cannot stay out of trouble.
He cannot stay out of trouble. And this is where the story gets complicated. Because Stradella's biography is not simply the biography of a great artist. It is the biography of a man who caused real harm to real people repeatedly, and who kept being saved from the consequences by the sheer force of his talent.
Which is a pattern we recognize. Across centuries, across industries. Institutions absorbing misconduct because the talent is too valuable to lose. Stradella is not a modern story. But it rhymes with modern stories in ways that are deeply uncomfortable.
Let's talk about Turin, 1677, because Turin is where Stradella's recklessness stops being an abstract character flaw and becomes something physical, something with a blade attached to it.
So here is what happens. Stradella is working as a music tutor, and he becomes entangled with a woman named Agnese Lomellini. Now, Agnese is not simply a woman. She is the mistress of Alvise Contarini, a Venetian nobleman, wealthy, connected, and by all accounts, a man who does not respond well to being publicly humiliated.
And Stradella orchestrates an elopement. He helps Agnese flee, they run together, and Contarini hires professional assassins to find them.
Not amateur muscle, professional assassins. Which tells you something about the level of fury and resources we are dealing with here.
The assassins track them to Turin, and they find them, and they attack Stradella in the street. Multiple stab wounds. They leave him for dead on the ground.
He survives. which is medically, statistically remarkable for 1677.
He survives. And here is the question that haunts everything that comes after. Does he change?
He does not change. And from a behavioral psychology standpoint, that is not actually surprising. There is a pattern in individuals who have what researchers call a high sensation-seeking profile, combined with a fundamental inability to connect present behavior to future consequence. The near-death experience does not recalibrate them. It confirms, in some distorted internal logic, that they are untouchable, that they will always survive.
Until they don't. Stradella eventually makes his way to Genoa, and Genoa, on the surface, seems like a fresh start. The city's noble families want his music. They employ him. They integrate him into their cultural life. But Genoa is not a neutral city. It is a city run by its great families, the Alberghi powerful, ancient, interconnected clans who govern not just through politics, but through something closer to a code, an understanding of honor that has practical enforcement mechanisms.
And the most powerful of those families, one of them is the Lomellini.
The Lomellini.
Now here is where the historical record gets murky in its details, but absolutely clear in its direction. Stradella becomes entangled in a scandal involving a woman connected to the Lomellini family, possibly a wife, possibly a daughter. The precise relationship is not definitively documented, but the family's response is documented.
Carolyn Gianturco, the musicologist whose 1991 thematic catalogue of Stradella's work is the definitive scholarly reference on his life, presents evidence that the affront to the Lomellini family honour was considered so grave that a contract was placed on Stradella's life, a hired killer, a sicario.
And what makes this particularly chilling is the specificity of it. This is not a crime of passion. This is not someone losing their temper in a moment of rage. This is a decision, made deliberately, executed professionally. The single wound to Stradella's abdomen, precise, fatal, efficient, bears every hallmark of someone who has done this before and knows exactly what they are doing.
One wound, one movement, and then the killer is gone back into the Carugi before anyone even understands what has happened. The evening of February, the 25th, 1682, Stradella is walking near the Piazza Banchi. This is a commercial and religious hub. The church of San Pietro in Banchi presides over the square, its loggia watching over the merchant's world below. The man who approaches him, we do not know his name. We have never known his name. He comes from behind, or from the shadows. The accounts vary on this detail, but they agree on what happens next.
One strike, abdomen, deep, fatal.
And Stradella falls. And the Piazza Banchi, which has seen centuries of commerce and prayer and ordinary human life, becomes, in that moment, a crime scene. He is found on the cobblestones. He does not survive this time.
The anonymous Genoese chronicle from 1682, the Cronaca di Genova, records the finding of the body and the subsequent inquest. And the diplomatic correspondence from the Genoese resident to the Duke of Mantua, preserved in the state archives of Mantua, is remarkably candid about the suspected motive. Stradella had been, quote, miserably killed, and the cause was believed to be his, quote, excessive amorous pursuits.
Miserably killed. 3 words in a diplomatic dispatch. That is all the official record gives us.
And then comes the part of this story that I find, honestly, more disturbing than the murder itself. The investigation. Or rather, the performance of an investigation.
The Genoese authorities launch an inquiry, and it goes nowhere. Not because the evidence is impossible to find, not because the city lacks functioning courts or capable officials. It goes nowhere because certain people in that city ensure that it goes nowhere.
The Lomellini family's influence, the sources describe it as simply immense. And what that means in practice is this. A man is murdered in a public square in broad enough circumstances that the motive is understood by everyone, including the authorities, and no one is charged. No one is tried. The killer is never identified. The family that almost certainly commissioned the killing faces 0 consequences.
0.
And from a criminological standpoint, this is not a failure of the system. This is the system working exactly as it was designed to work for the people it was designed to protect. When we talk about institutional corruption, we sometimes imagine dramatic cover-ups, destroyed evidence, bribed witnesses, but sometimes institutional corruption looks like nothing. A wall of silence. An investigation that simply stops.
The silence of Genoa in the spring of 1682 is its own kind of document. It tells us everything about how power operated in the early modern Italian city-state. And it asks us quietly, uncomfortably, how different the mechanisms really are today. Stradella was buried the day after his murder, the church of Santa Maria della Vigna, just steps from the Piazza Banchi where he fell. There is a particular cruelty in that proximity. The place where he died and the place where he was laid to rest, separated by almost nothing.
And then history does something interesting. In 1844, 162 years after the murder, a German opera composer named Friedrich von Flotow writes an opera called Alessandro Stradella. And in Flotow's version, Stradella is a dashing romantic hero. His adventures are glamorous. His passion is noble. And the assassins sent to kill him are so moved by the beauty of his music that they lay down their weapons and spare his life.
They spare his life.
The music saves him. In the opera,
it did not save him in Genoa.
And this is where I want to push back on the mythology, because the Flotow version is not just historically inaccurate, it is morally convenient. It takes a story about a man whose behavior caused genuine harm to Agnese Lomellini, to the unnamed Genoese woman, to everyone caught in the wake of his choices, and it converts it into a story about a dashing hero whose genius makes him untouchable. And that conversion, that laundering of history into legend, has consequences. Because when we tell the romantic version, we are implicitly telling an audience that genius confers a kind of moral exemption, that the rules don't apply to the truly talented, that the harm is somehow beside the point.
And Stradella's actual story, the real one, is a direct refutation of that idea. His genius was real, the harm he caused was also real. And those two things coexist without cancelling each other out, and it is precisely in that coexistence that the story becomes genuinely instructive.
The women in his story deserve to be named as something more than supporting characters. Agnese Lomellini, who was herself placed in enormous danger by Stradella's choices, the unnamed Genoese woman whose connection to a powerful family ultimately cost him his life. These are not footnotes, these are human beings.
The Piazza Banchi in Genoa still exists, the church of San Pietro in Banchi still stands above it. The Carugi still wind away in every direction, narrow and shadowed and ancient. If you stand there in the early evening as Stradella must have stood, for the last time on the 25th of February, 1682, the place has a quality that is very hard to describe, a compression of history. Events layered upon events until the stones themselves seem to carry the weight of everything that has ever happened on them. A man of extraordinary talent walked into that square. A professional killer was waiting. And the city, the institutions, the courts, the powerful families chose silence. That silence is 344 years old now. It has never really broken.
Alessandro Stradella was not simply a victim. He was a man whose choices created the conditions for his own murder. And the institutions that failed to pursue justice for him failed not because they lacked the means, but because they lacked the will. Two failures. One human, one institutional, and between them a body on the cobblestones and a silence that the official record has never filled. The music, at least, survived. Whether that is enough, I leave to you.
If this episode stayed with you, if the story of Alessandro Stradella is the kind of history you want more of, subscribe to this channel. It is the single most powerful thing you can do to keep these stories alive. Share this episode with someone who thinks true crime is only a modern phenomenon. Because the dark corners of history, they go all the way back. And we will keep going back with you. I'm Adam Jones.
And I'm Nina Jovovich. We'll see you in the dark.
And so the file closes. But the case doesn't. Not for the families. Not for the witnesses who still pause before answering questions. Not for a city that remembers, even when it pretends not to. The evidence sits somewhere in a box. The photographs fade. The names are spoken less often. But the echoes remain. If this story stayed with you, if you felt that silence at the end of each unanswered question, Subscribe to the channel. Not for us. For the stories that never got a second look. For the voices that were cut short. For the cases that refused to stay buried. Because the truth doesn't disappear. It waits.
And as long as the questions are still unanswered, the case isn't over. It's just waiting for someone to look again.
And here, it keeps reverberating.